Welcome to Talk Data to Me, a podcast where we talk about all things data. My name's Katie Williams.
And I'm Natalie Takis.
And we would like to welcome Brad Barth here today. He's our first guest on our podcast. Brad, thank you so much for joining us. You have a very extensive experience in both the construction and construction software industry. We'd like to really talk a lot about how data has changed, the impact of data throughout your career. But I think before we dive into that, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, and share a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And by the way, I'm honored to be the first guest on this podcast.
We
that's
think you'll
really
be
cool.
A real crowd draw.
Well, that won't scare anybody away, but
No,
yes,
not at all.
thrilled to be here talking about this topic. So thanks for having me. Yeah, I just been in the construction technology sector for 30 plus years, going back to a company called Hard Dollar in the early 90s. Before that, just kind of grew up, if we go all the way back, grew up in the construction industry, been in and around construction my whole life, mostly on the heavy civil side, heavy highway side, in terms of sort of my exposure to that. And then, like I said, starting with Hard Dollar and then through the evolution to InEight, just been focused on the technology side. So I feel like I'm the luckiest person in the world. I get to really combine my two passions in construction and technology that come to play in this role. So yeah, and seeing a lot of change over those 30 years, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I think that's what's really cool. And I mean, like what we really want to dig into, because I know that what Natalie and I talked about last time is just like when we were in college, and we don't really call ourselves like, I mean, we had technology most of our like young adult lives, but like just when we started our jobs, and then it was like some of the things that we just expected to be there, but then weren't necessarily there. So I know I'm really looking forward to hearing just about how some of these big changes and how, I mean, maybe just jumping off from there, especially around data and just how things were done when you first, like your first job in technology, like how was it done? I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, you'll probably be horrified by some of the things going on back in the day, but yeah, I mean, I always tell the story when we first started with Hard Dollar, which was one of the first electronic estimating systems. This was before Excel even, right? Excel wasn't even around yet, so this was back in the DOS days, and certainly pre-internet, mobile, pre-everything, right? Everything that we kind of take for granted now. So, the story I like to tell is we used to do a full week training class that we now do like in a few hours, because the difference is we'd spend like 3 days just teaching people how to use the computer, right? Like, here's the keyboard, here's what the escape key does, here's what the arrow keys do. No mouse, thank goodness, because that would have just freaked people out back then, right? So.
Oh yeah, like that's an experience.
Yeah, no, this mouse. Was like, this was all basically everything that we take for granted now in terms of technology. None of that existed back then. So, but it was, it was interesting just because I think, we got the early adopters, right? We got the folks that were really kind of on the leading, maybe even bleeding edge of technology adoption, that were, taking risks and going out and buying, PCs for their estimators and budget managers and things like project controllers and stuff. They got the benefit out of it. So, it took time to much harder and, more time to get up to speed, and, that sort of tail to get to the benefit of the solution was much longer back then than it is now, because just getting things installed, we had just installing the software, there was a 40 disk, pack to install, insert disk number 37, as you're going through that process. So it was like, a long time to kind of get to the point where you could get the benefits out of it. But yeah, I mean, we saw, people back then, people saw the potential of, digitalizing their estimating process, which is what we were focused on back then. And we're willing to put in the work and the investment up front to get the benefit out the back end. So, yeah, a lot's changed since then, both in terms of the technology world and the industry itself. Construction industry has changed quite dramatically as well.
So you mentioned that the time up front to onboard to even just utilizing technology was kind of a barrier to entry. Would you say that there were other things that were prohibitive to companies adopting technology, such as cost or manpower to be able to lead those trainings and implement the software?
All of the above, right? I mean, it
Okay.
was, most organizations, even the bigger ones, didn't have, IT organizations at all, let alone, enough resources in that area that could help, right? So it was usually, an estimator or a business user just trying to figure this stuff out on their own, right? Like how do I get a PC set up? God forbid they wanted to set up a network, that was
Yeah.
something they'd have to do. So, they're bringing in consultants oftentimes and things like that. So there was, it was just a ton of, it's so much easier now, right? With the cloud and, just basically turn it on and, other than some, a little bit of training and, business process setup, you're ready to go, right? It's so much easier. So, I think that's probably the coolest thing in terms of the technology evolution over those 3 decades is just all that sort of, let's call it grunt work, that you would have to do just to get to the point where you could use the tool. All that's just kind of melted away now, right? It's so much easier to get going.
It was like the initial push for even looking at technology because like jobs were getting too large. And so it was like, okay, we can't do this by hand anymore. Like it's just not like feasible, sustainable. Like, was that a big driver or no, it's just like you think the margins started to become just we've got to find a way to be more efficient, or I mean, is it both or?
I think it's both, but definitely, I think we saw early on, the categories of people that were migrating to this kind of technology was, like you said, it was we've got a big project coming up. Let's take an opportunity, to see if we can improve our process and efficiency. Where they kind of see that big project sort of coming on the horizon, and so they took the time up front to kind of get ready for it. But I think it's, and this is true, InEight does 16 business processes now, right, of which estimating is just one. But even strictly within estimating, I think people like today, people saw the ability to avoid just reinventing the wheel, right? I mean, every estimate, imagine doing, again, this was pre-Excel back in the early days. There was a little bit of Lotus 1, 2, 3 being used. Your viewers can Google that if they're not sure what that is, but most of 90% of our early customers were coming literally from pen and paper. So they'd have these, big grids and big legal size pads where they'd do the estimates. They'd have the 10 key calculator over on the right. Calculating. That was one of my jobs as an intern, was just running the 10 key. So, it was, there was definitely a realization from people that, man, there's got to be a better way to do this. And, so I think as the PC sort of revolution happened and people started to realize, hey, we could do this on a computer, then the general migration was, from pen and paper to a spreadsheet, electronic spreadsheet to something like hard dollars. So the benefits were recognized early on. I think it was more just, can we, are we able to kind of deal with the technology challenges to get there, back in the day.
Do you think there was any like appreciation at that point for like the data side of it? Like, I'm guessing no, because I think about where we're at today in terms of data, which I don't want to jump that far ahead yet, but I'm guessing no one was really thinking like I should rely on like this data could be used later and I should be doing this and like thinking about things like quality. Yeah,
like I was wondering about benchmarking. Did that concept even exist?
That was a completely foreign concept. I mean, people did it, right? They had 3-ring binders of
referring back to your ledger.
Look back to your ledger, right? But you can imagine how cumbersome that is, and the bid's due in 2 hours. Hey, let's go pull out that 3-ring binder of all those ledgers and comb through it, with no search capability or anything. So, it was a thing that people wanted to do. But to answer your question, Katie, I mean, it was not about the data, and I think that's something that is changing. But even still, that's I think we're sort of on the cusp of the focus changing from the features and the functions being the real value that someone's trying to get out of the tech versus the data itself is the real value that someone's trying to get out of the tech. And I think we're seeing that shift now. But back then it was all about. I mean, honestly, it's all about, how do I avoid having to do all the math on my 10 key? And when something changes, I got to go back and redo, 50,000 calculations. So it was really all about, the features and functionality back then and automating the process.
So when it came to making decisions, it wasn't, it was still very much who knows, who was there. I mean, from your experience, that's how it seemed like you made business decisions based off experience, not,
Yeah.
I mean,
Intuition.
yeah.
No,
Yeah.
that's right. That's right. And
How much do you
we'd
think
get
that's
challenged too, right? Like we'd be showing the software and again, no internet. So anytime we were showing it, you'd be in person and you'd see, you know, 2 or 3 people kind of gathered around the screen looking at the software. And then there'd be one person on the 10 key, like checking our numbers, right? It's just like, because there was just this distrust that a computer could
Sure.
potentially possibly do what we do manually. So it was, yeah, there's definitely a you know the buyers and users were very much the same, right? Today you'll have kind of different personas, right? You get the users that are kind of figuring out what they want, and then the buyers that are more looking after, you know, the overall technology strategy for the company and things like that. But back then it was generally more kind of rogue, right? You'd have, you know, again, back then focused strictly on estimating, but you might have an estimator that just wants to go off and, you know, and sort of try this new system. There weren't, you know, like IT compliance, you know, or policies that anybody had to adhere to, right? So it was very much more cowboy style than what we see today.
And so that's interesting to me because it takes someone who's really passionate, I feel, about moving towards technology to be the person at an organization who is leading that charge. Do you have any noteworthy stories from your time on the software side of things where you worked with a client who made a dramatic change from more of an analog process to more technology, or just some dramatic changes that you've seen?
Yeah, maybe one, if we're going back a ways, one that sticks out to me was a company still around, actually still a customer. They've gone through quite a few evolutions in terms of their ownership and so forth. But there was a company called CA Rasmussen out of California that was a early adopter of the product, and that company just went through like tremendous growth, right? They were in highway construction and California, just, you know, spending tons of money on highway work, and they just really did a nice job kind of capturing the market. So they just grew dramatically, and they, you know, they were one of the first ones to use the software in a networked mode. So, you know, they took the time and they got a network set up. So as they added different offices and they had different people in these different offices, you know, they could collaborate together on an estimate, and even across multiple offices, if there was a big bid opening or bid letting happening, or they needed to get like, hey, let's get 10 people in this thing to deal with all the last minute changes, they could do that through the technology, which was just unfathomable before, right? Like the idea of trying to do that on pen and paper, or even everybody running, you know, separate spreadsheets, you know, it was just a huge differentiator for them, huge competitive advantage for them, and that was really helped us grow in California because the word kind of spread and people saw what they were doing, and it was like, we want to do that too. How do we do that?
Well, that's like to Natalie's question. I was going to say, where did you see that breakthrough because I think, you know, Gartner's got that curve, or maybe it's not even Gartner's, where you've got like your leaders, right, of change, and then you've got everyone else that kind of like waits and sits around to see when's it going to happen, and then everyone kind of gets there, and whatever the curve is called. But I'm curious, like, what was the big drive, or like where was the shift? Like, did it come from like others outside of our industry where everyone's like, oh, hey, like, you know, like all this technology, all these big changes, ERPs are coming? Was it that, or was it like owners are expecting more, or were there just big changes in the industry itself? I mean, because something had to shift to start making some big momentum on like having something networked, right, and shifting the technology forward. Or was it the software providers like Hard Dollar that said, hey, we think you need these features, we're going to make it available and help push you that direction?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think we influenced that, but it's probably a tiny bit, right? I mean, certainly, you know, out there talking about the benefits of it, I'm sure helped raise awareness. But, you know, you touched on it a little bit. I think, you know, we saw, particularly within the, you know, the scope that even at Hard Dollar and at InEight that we focus on, you know, going back, let's say into the 90s. I mean, you saw you saw a couple things happened, as you alluded to on the owner side, right? So in the world of estimating, many of the state DOTs, for example, started making available electronic bid lists. So if you, for a particular project, they'd make available a file you could download that had the 500 bid items for the project with all the quantities and descriptions and all that stuff. So there was this magical moment where, I can just download that file and load it into the estimating system, and nobody has to type all that in, right? Or copy and paste it all in. And then they got to the point where you could actually submit your bid back to them that way electronically, right? So
so you're behind if you can't do
so
that.
if you're not doing that, now you're literally at a competitive disadvantage, right? It's nothing abstract about that at all. Like if you can't make those changes and submit your electronic bid, and everybody else is, you're having to close your bid 2 hours in advance, to do things manually. That's a huge disadvantage. So, and then the same thing in the scheduling world, right? Primavera came along and really, many of the owners, particularly in the government sector, DOTs and cities, counties, states, started to require, P6 schedules or P6 like schedules, right? So another example of how I think that kind of owner push down to the contractors really helped change the perception of the technology from something that's sort of a nice to have to something that we got to do,
Yeah.
So we kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier about looking at data and actually truly realizing value of data from the system. What are some of the first times that you were able to realize the benefits of data you could pull from technology, or perhaps a project you were on or a customer you were working with that had kind of like that aha moment where, it'd be really great if we could pull this information back out, and then they saw that they were able to?
Well, it's going to sound like kind of a duh moment now, because benchmarking, you alluded to earlier, but we kind of take that for granted now. That's why one of the big reasons why people use our solution is that benchmarking. But I can remember we had a large paving company in the kind of southeast Midwest, in that whole area. There are lots of different offices, and had become one of our larger customers, and the moment, so along the way we had released the sort of the other side, the estimating system was the first bit, and then we started getting into the tracking the results and tracking your progress and all that kind of stuff, and so there was literally, we were sitting in a meeting, and there was this light bulb moment that came on their side, where if we use this same system, we can estimate the project the way we're going to build it. So then that saves us all this time of kind of getting everything ready to push out to the field and get the budget set up and all that stuff, with a little more effort in estimating that smooths that whole path. But then the real moment was, if we track the results, at that same level of granularity, then that data comes back for benchmarking, right? And like all of a sudden, we don't need those 3-ring binders anymore. Excuse me, we don't need the we can just automate that whole benchmarking validation process. And for these guys, it wasn't just internal benchmarking and validation. A lot of their projects were private, negotiated, right? So I remember the story where one of their folks told me, they were sitting across from the owner, in a meeting as they were pursuing a project, and the customer, potential customer, would ask them questions of, well, where'd you get that number? Where did you come up with that? And they could just show the benchmark graph, right? Like, well, we've done the same kind of thing 37 times, and here's the history, and see the number we're giving you. It's right there in that confidence level that you're looking for. So it really changed the game for them in terms of, there's an example of where data, helped them build confidence with their customer, help them win work and that kind of stuff. So
yeah, not only is it like an efficiency topic, but it's also a credibility piece to be able to have that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And a customer loyalty thing, right?
That's very cool that you remember that.
This whole time I've been really impressed with Brad's memory of like all these like markers. I don't feel like I have as good of
I've
a memory.
I've lost a lot of memory, but some things just still stick in my head.
You'd never know.
I can't remember my address, but
That's good. Well, I mean, if we fast forward where now we, obviously we have InEight, a very integrated system where you have all this data flowing through. I mean, what are your thoughts on, obviously the big buzzwords of machine learning and generative AI, and where do you think we're at as an industry? What do you think we're doing a good job taking advantage of, not taking advantage of? I mean, there's definitely things we are doing. I mean, we've always been doing a good job of forecasting. I think looking at past cost is something that we've done a good job for the last several years. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we kind of touched on it at the beginning there. I think the the industry is, I think, starting to look at tech differently and starting to focus on the data. And I think the amazing things that people see, even without searching it out, you can't escape the amazing things that people are doing with AI now, right? So it's kind of creating this, how does that apply to our industry? How can we take advantage of some of that tech? So that's driving, I think, a conversation around, well, that really powerful, beneficial impact of AI and machine learning. Well, you need something to train that with, right? So, the cool thing where you can go type in a description and it creates an image for you, in DALL-E and things like that, only is possible because of the massive, database of photos that have been tagged and that they could feed into that learning model, right? So same thing is true in construction. Obviously, you guys know this. You got to have good data to train it. So I think that's sort of thought process. As you think about, if we're going to take advantage of AI, we got to have good data. Where are we going to get that data? Well, there's no sort of industry data set out there like there is of photos, on the internet. So we got to create our own data. So I think that's really driving the digital transformation that we've seen in the last few years. The momentum behind that, which is great to see, right? It's because it is evolving more from what features do we need as we look at RFPs that we receive. There's less about do you have this feature, do you have that feature, and more about how do you capture the data, what do you do with the data, how can we leverage the data, what kind of analytics do you have. How do we have data? How do we enforce data quality? Right, that kind of stuff. You didn't see those kind of things 5 years ago, right, very often, and now you see them almost all the time. And I think it lines up with, as you all know, the sort of 3 stages that InEight's gone through, kind of followed that same evolution. It was first stage, even starting 10 years ago. On this new platform, first stage was all about, let's get the features that people need, right? So they can do their job. And then the second stage was the integrations. How do we take advantage of lighting up those connections across those roles and business process? And that's kind of largely where we've been, and kind of we're now sort of coming out of that, right, as you all know, into that third stage, which is all about, how do we unlock that data? How do we take advantage of that data? So it's been I think there's been good alignment with the path that InEight has been following. With what I'm thinking, at least in the industry, is people are shifting their mindset more to, this is data. Actually, you used to be sort of think of the data as kind of the byproduct of, just doing your job, and okay, we got to take care of that data, and what are we going to do with it? But the mindset is now shifting, I think, to that data can actually be our most valuable asset, aside from our people. So it's not, it's less about this feature or that feature, and more about how are we going to leverage that super valuable set of data that we're capturing to get benefit from it every project then on. It's not just how it helps get the job done on that one project.
I think there's so much truth to that. Every time I'm in a call with someone talking about features, one of the first questions that typically gets asked is, okay, well, how do I get the data, and what does it look like, and what data is like available for me? So I think that's a really good point you made, that data historically has been almost referred to as a byproduct, and now it's a big driver. And I know I've seen a lot of push for data quality, because as that mindset starts to shift, you start to see, again, that aha moment, that light bulb turns on, and people realize, oh wow, if I'm really good about what I put in, then I get really good stuff out. So I think that's a really important shift that I think has been pretty recent, at least in my experience.
Yeah.
And I think once that becomes widespread, if it hasn't already, analytics are really going to take off, and that's going to really, really help with the machine learning and the AI pushes that we're seeing in the industry now.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think the if you start with that end in mind, and then you kind of back up to what do we got to do to get there, then you very quickly get into, well, we need a sort of standardized business process so that we can collect the data in a consistent way. we've got the quality that we want in there, because obviously, you know, you see it on some of these AI examples today, you know, which is still in its infancy, really. But you get some weird results, right? So, you know, you know, the better the data you put in there, the better the results you're going to get. And so
it becomes less of a chicken or an egg question, you know, because oftentimes people implementing systems often are, okay, well, let's focus on our process and less about what we get out. Like, we'll get the data later. And now you kind of see that shift of, well, this is what I want at the end of the day. Let's facilitate process toward that.
That's right.
So
Well, not, I think those are both really important, but I was curious because you made a comment about the industry data. And I'm curious if you think that the industry will ever reach a point where it is willing to share. I mean, there's so many other industries that are sharing. Like, I just think if I went and, like, you know, went to get an insurance quote, I'm going to get contacted by like everyone saying, oh, you know, you're looking for a new insurance. Let me give you, you know, like, here's a quote for me and here's a quote for me, right? And I mean, you have so many other industries that are selling data and making their data available, because I think they've realized that it's not the actual data, but it's what you do with the data that's of value. And we're very much still in a place of, well, if you show me yours, I'll show you mine, right? And kind of your chicken or egg, Natalie, right? We've got this problem. Nobody wants to be the first one to show what's under the covers, but I mean, I just think, I mean, what do you think, Brad? Do you think we're going to get there?
I think so. I'd like to think we're going to get there. I think, you know, construction is often described as being very unique, and every project's different, and all that's true, right? I mean, it's not like manufacturing. It's not like banking or medical or, you know, other industries where it's much more repetitive and everybody kind of does things the same way.
No, but if you get industry data, you can actually start to pull more similar projects together where you might not have a contractor, right, or an owner that's got all the parameters, but maybe somebody else does. So then your like machine learning capability could get much stronger and more accurate because your body of data now has so many more similar parameters to look at. I mean, anonymized in a lot of ways, obviously. I'm not suggesting like go pull back the covers of everything you've got. That's not what I'm saying, but like there's certain things that, right, like would benefit both you and someone else by sharing some
no doubt
of it.
No doubt. Yeah. And that's, you know, I think what you'll see is not necessarily sort of, you know, the industry being on one end or the other of that spectrum. I think it'll be, you know, some kind of combination. And to your point, right, the more data that you get in that, if you had an anonymous industry data set, if it's, you know, if there's enough context in that data, you know, where you can put in the parameters that sort of affect the results the way you do work, right? So, you know, one of the challenges, like, what's in the scope of something, right? So, you know, I'll just use that paving contractor we're talking about, right? If you take a paving example, you know, what size paving machine did you use to do that, you know, that one data point that says we had so many, you know, square feet per hour productivity. What went into that, right? How big was the crew? What was the constraints? You know, what was the access? How far away was the batch plant, right? So that one data point by itself is potentially harmful if you don't understand kind of where it came from, right? Yeah. But to your point, the more data points you get in there, it starts to help, you know, at least give you some good guidance, right? And some meaningful insights that you may be lacking. So, you know, and I think excuse me, I think you'll have some folks in the industry, some organizations that are just not going to share their data. They're just, you know, that's just, you know, just the way they are, and they feel like that's a competitive advantage for them, and, you know, fair to do that. But you know, I think more and more, it's probably a lot like, you know, you remember when we first started, you know, moving the solution and releasing it in the cloud. Like, you had this pushback on, oh my God, my data is going to be in the cloud, and, you know, that's kind of scary. And but now it's like, you know, people would be shocked if we didn't have the cloud, right? So
I think there's more fear the other way now, for sure, right? I mean, I think on-prem only would be suspect, right?
Exactly. Now it's completely flipped.
The pendulum swung the other way. Yeah.
So I think, to your point, that pendulum will swing that way relative to the data and willingness to put your data out there. But I think the harder part, I think people will get used to that notion of, anonymizing the data and putting it out there. I think the harder part is going to be, can they really get real value out of that? And that's where, organizations like InEight have got to prove that, we can get meaningful insights from that big data set that does reflect the way you work, right? The way that your parameters for how you do business.
Yeah. Sure.
So in that vein, do you have any reasons that you think our technology construction sector has been kind of laggard in adopting technology? We've talked a little bit about pendulum swinging, right? We talk about cloud, we talk about sharing data, but why was it so slow to swing toward technology, do you think? I know we talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but as it became more prevalent in the industry, we still saw a lot of slowness to adopt. Do you have any comments on why you think that is?
Yeah, I could go on and on that one. I mean, so I think first and foremost is, when you think about the nature of the industry, even the term contractor, right? Where you're performing a contract, so you're doing what the owner pays you to do, right? And because there's, in many sectors of the industry, there's so few barriers to entry. There's always a lot of competition. Competitors come up. They may not last, but they come up and they create competitive pressure on a particular project. So that combination of we're going to do only what the owner is asking us to do and paying us to do, and that competitive pressure means that it's very hard for a typical construction company to go and invest, on their own, to go, put technology in and get the benefit out of it, because the profit margins are so slim, right? And the risk of eroding those profit margins, even without these sort of side projects of let's go implement some tech, to me, those are the biggest, historically have been the biggest challenges, right? It's just hard to be able to kind of take, resources out of this already, we're trying to keep the overhead low so that we can get these projects done and make profit. Now we want to pull people out of that to help implement the technology, to help build business process, do evaluations, right? So that's the kind of thing I think that's been challenging, right? Like if you're a banking organization or a mining organization where, you can make those capital investments, and it ultimately gives you a better product, and you control the price of that product and all that kind of stuff. You've got an opportunity within all of that to go invest in technology much more easily than a typical contractor could for those reasons.
Would you say though too that, I mean, at least from my experience, I've never really noticed that like individual jobs aren't necessarily innovative, or like they lack on going and finding their own solutions for things to make themselves more efficient. It's just when it comes to, like you're saying, bringing it back to like how it works for like the greater good of an organization, the centralization effort of like now integrating to everything else, the overhead that's required in that, right? Of like, now I've got to work with a shared service, or I've got to, align to what everyone else is doing. Whereas before, like, at least again, from my experience, it seems like when I'm on my job, I'm like my own company, I'm running things. The culture has been very decentralized. Let me do what I got to do to protect my margin, complete my work, leave me alone a little bit, right, in my box. It has always felt to me like there's a ton of innovation, there's a ton of desire to be efficient, find better ways to do things. But where it becomes challenging is once you incorporate like the bigger business model into that, of how can everyone realize those efficiencies, because there are a ton of efficiencies if everyone can do it the same. But then back to your problem of every contract's different, we have different industries, different requirements, different scopes. So how can you do that and meet everyone's needs, right? I mean, I experienced that implementing like SAP, right? And then same thing goes with our technology, which is where our technology helps so much, because we're saying, here's the standard business processes that you should do. Here is a way to complete your work and be efficient at doing it. But to me, I've never noticed that it seems the jobs don't want the technology. It's just how can you do it and keep efficient in a way that's also cost effective for an entire organization.
You nailed it, right? It's not for lack of desire or lack of innovation, right? To your point, it's amazing what people do, on a project by project basis, even, prior to implementing something like InEight, people create, amazing,
Yeah.
spreadsheets, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
we've all
Massive
seen these
solution.
spreadsheets that are just like, holy cow, right?
Yeah, you're
With
like, why didn't you become a
macros and
developer? I mean, your VBA skills are fantastic. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the challenge is then how do you, to get the benefit beyond that one project where that innovator is, and that innovator is going to go on to the next project, and but trying to to get that kind of cross company benefit requires that there's sort of a stop and let's take stake in how we're going to do things, because the evolution is maybe, various people on various projects have like tried different things and adopted different things, but now we've got a myriad of different ways of doing things. So how do we sort of stop and get some standardization in place, which again is how we're going to get that nice data coming out of it that we can take advantage of on every project from then forward. So
Well, and it seems cyclical, right? Because then you go back to, well, who has the budget and the time, right, to make that happen for the organization? So it does seem like a bit of a circular problem and a tough loop to break.
It is, one of the things I'm most optimistic about, though, particularly over the last decade or so, is the nature. We talked about that sort of nature of the arm's length kind of owner contractor relationship. I'm only going to do what you pay me to do, and everything else is a change order. That's changing, right? So there's an evolution to more, kind of open book kind of projects, more shared risk projects, more transparency, more collaboration across the stakeholders. There's much more of a, hey, we're in this together, is kind of the overall theme, where, it used to be the risk was almost entirely on the contractor, and, it's a lump sum bid or a hard dollar bid. And, your profit was, starting to erode from day one with all of the things that came up, right? So I think that shift to more of that collaborative approach, between owner, contractor, engineer, is getting rid of some of those barriers, right, and some of those obstacles to implementing technology, and it's becoming almost more of an expectation, right? So as you're kind of, sharing more about how you manage a project, if you're on the contractor side, it's almost expected now that you're using some sort of an automated, digitalized solution like InEight, as opposed to it's not a confidence inducing thing to say we use a bunch of Excel spreadsheets sort of cobbled together, right? That the owner doesn't get a lot of confidence from that. So again, I think that there's some industry pressure to change and adopt technology now too, that's just continuing to increase.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we had asked what was like the big push for, like, back in the day technology to make that big shift. But I think today another big shift, like you said, is the owner expectations have also caused like contractors to rise in terms of the reporting they're providing, the data, the collection. And now, once again, they're in a position that if I haven't implemented a system like this that is integrated, I can't produce the type of, reports and information that our owners are expecting, or other stakeholders, whether that's the designer they're working with or the subs that they're working with. And so I think I'm glad that you brought that up, because once again, it's kind of helping drive this change and shift, which is really good. So
yeah, and, projects are getting bigger. You end up with more JVs, joint ventures on projects where you got to work hand in hand with another partner. And then that brings its own expectations of the tech, that you're using for that. And then I think just the continuing upward trend of design build, where, projects are more iterative, and progressive design build, as opposed to, hey, let's take, 6 months and go design every single aspect of the project, and then we'll produce a hard bid from that. Now it's a lot more iterative. Construction is actually happening a lot more like we build software, right?
Yeah, the parallels are fun.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
It's the agile construction process out there, but those are all positive things for adoption of tech and kind of creating those expectations that we talked about.
I think maybe our last question, unless Natalie, you have any, maybe would be, if you have anything else you want to share, but also maybe what are you most excited for in terms of what's to come in the industry and with technology?
Yeah, I'm glad you left me an open question there here at the end, because I did want to make sure we talked about AI a little bit, and some of the challenge with that in terms of getting good data and getting useful sort of insights out of that data. But I think the thing I'm most excited about with AI is how we can make the system and the data that's inside of it more accessible, right? Like today, if you think about, if there's a big organization, let's say they've got 1,000 people that need information that InEight has, let's say that's in your project control system, you're getting that information either because somebody sent you a report, or you're going into the system and running it, looking at a dashboard, or you're a trained user and you're going in and navigating to what you want to see, and you know where you're going. But there's a vast majority of those 1,000 people that that just have quick questions that they need, or they just need they need this or they need that, but they don't necessarily need to be experts in the system. And I think one of the benefits of AI and the whole NLP and natural language stuff is we kind of open the door to that data where you can interact with it, just like you would
Without
call
knowing
just like you would call your buddy and
Yeah.
get an answer, or you would send an email and
Yeah.
somebody would answer, right? Just interact
Yeah.
with the data through sort of traditional means to
Right.
get a quick question like, hey, what has our productivity been on this kind of thing in the past? We're going to add this scope to this project. What should we think about? Or where do we typically, what's the best subcontractor for this kind of work? All that,
What
all
are
those
our critical
answers are
path
in that data.
activities? Yeah, stuff
Mhm.
like that. Yeah.
The answers are there. But right now you've got to be trained a little bit on how to go find those answers, right?
Absolutely.
Or represent them in a dashboard or something. So I think
someone else
I
had
think
to
there's
do it for
opportunity to
you. Yeah.
really open up, the number of people that can interact with that data, and therefore, people can make decisions faster with better knowledge, get people up to speed faster as you hire them. So that's probably the thing I'm most excited about.
I love that. Me too. I mean, I think it's incredible how much it's advanced as well so quickly, right? Because I think everyone is so excited about it, and the more people are excited about it, the more it improves as well,
Yeah,
which
that's right.
is cool too. So
yeah, it's a fun time. It's the challenges now are a lot less problematic than the challenges when I first started. So these are fun challenges, and it's not about how do you plug your computer in so that it works.
Well, it definitely
Turn it
feels like
on.
there's less convincing that you need to do this right now,
Mhm.
which is a good thing to be passed. But I mean, there's definitely still, I mean, like Natalie and I plan, dive deeper into like change management, for example. Like that's still such a hard, especially when we talk about just the way projects are structured, right? Very decentralized, still on an island. They don't have the time to dedicate to it. I mean, right? Like that's still a
Yeah.
huge challenge to overcome. But it is really exciting just to think about all the data that we're collecting. We have most people on board that we need to be doing it. It's going to be a differentiator. You're going to be left behind if you don't do it. So
Yeah.
at least we aren't
Yeah.
having to convince people of that anymore.
That's right.
So.
That mental hurdle has been crossed, right? Like it's no longer, why would I want to do that? Now it's, well, of course I
Yeah.
want to do that. It's more about,
Yeah.
how do we get there, and, when do we do it, and how do we phase it in and that kind of stuff. But
we're not just relying on Bob anymore that sits in the closet with his PDFs and his binders.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
But
Yeah,
well,
that's
thank
exactly
you
right.
so much, Brad. I thought this was a great conversation. We really appreciate you being on our podcast, our second episode and our first guest. So
Thank you both. Yes, I will live in infamy as your first guest. So that's awesome. But yeah, thanks for having me. And it's awesome you guys are doing this.
Thanks, Brad.